Hello and welcome to Elevate 2021. My name is Kevin Ridley and this session is Google Maps Places API. Disclaimer, give me a little bit to read this, but feel free to pause it if you're watching on a replay. Okay, our agenda. We'll start by creating a project in Google Cloud Source. After that, we'll find the API we need. Then we will enable it, and we will create the API key, which will allow us access to the API itself. And we'll do a Google Setup demo to show that. Then we'll go over some of the API documentation. We'll do the Places API summary, which includes place search, place details, and photos, which we'll be demoing. That'll be followed by the PowerBuilder demo. After that, we will do a code review, and we will end with the Q&A session. Okay, as I mentioned before, my name is Kevin Ridley. I'm a PowerBuilder MVP. I was originally a PowerBuilder MVP in 2018, and then again in 2019, and again this year, 2021. My Facebook profile is on the left there, as well as my LinkedIn. And if you need to reach me at all, I check messages on LinkedIn about once a month or so. So feel free to drop me a message on LinkedIn. Some skills, I've been doing some Power Server projects lately. Done quite a bit of EA Server in the past and some conversions from EA Server to Power Server, etc. Active Directory, SQL. I pretty much specialize in web services, integrations with REST and SOAP. Part of that using OAuth, and also I've done some Java and messaging services. Some recent projects. In 2021, I did an integration with PowerBuilder and Power Server application with a service called Populi. That was a REST API, and we used HTTPClient for that. Also in 2020, I did an Active Directory upgrade where we replaced the database and user ID password authentication with Active Directory user ID and password authentication. 2019, did an integration with Salesforce, their REST API, and again that was using the HTTP client and OAuth client. 2018, did something similar with Microsoft Dynamics, their REST API, and again using the OAuth client and HTTP client. Also forgot to put in there, in 2019 I did a webinar for Dropbox API, and that's on YouTube. If you search PowerBuilder and Dropbox, you will find it. A little about my company. It is called Omega Solutions LLC. It's my own company, and I do long-term contracts, and I also do independent short-term project work. So again, if you need to reach me, feel free to hit me up on LinkedIn. So you start with the Google Cloud setup. First thing you're going to need to do is create a Google Cloud account. I've listed the URL here for the free account. Basically, it's penny per transaction, about approximately. You get $300 free credit for 90 days, and then you have to start paying for it. So once you do that, you go to the console, and you see the URL here, console.cloud.google.com, and you log in, and then you click to create a project, or you can select an existing project. So you'll see the ones I have here, an old one I did for OAuth, first project, and then the one I just created for this one, Elevate 2021. Or you probably have a blank one if you just started. You click New Project, and you pick a name, and go from there. Alright, APIs and services. So the next thing you want to do is find the API that you want to work with. In this case, it's the Google Places. So you will, on the left here, you'll see API and services. You'll select that and then select the dashboard. And then once you do that, we're going to search for the API, then we're going to enable it and create an API key. Okay, so you can search for your API up here, and I type Places in this case, or it'll just have a list of APIs here in the middle here, and you just scroll down and find it. I've already found it, it's Places API, but if it's down here, you just click on it, and then you'll get another screen that pops up, and you just hit the Enable button, and it'll be enabled. Next thing you want to do is create an API key for it. So then you'll go on the left here to Credentials, and you'll select Create Credentials. See, I already have one here, API key 1, and that's the one I used in the demo, which I'm going to delete right after the presentation. So don't be trying to use my API key. All right, so let's show how we did this. Here is the Google Cloud Console. You'll see I'm inside this project here, Elevate 2021. If I click on it, I can select a different project, or I can create a new one. So if I do New Project, you just pick a name. If you have an organization, you can put that information in too. And cancel out of here, I don't need another one. So it tells you your project information here. It's got some good API stuff here. If you go to the API's overview, you can see some of the requests you've made. See here, I've made 157 requests, 1 error, and it tells you which API. So you can have multiple APIs. And up at the top here, it will tell you what your status is on your free trial. So go back to the dashboard here. All right, so once you create your project, you're going to come over here to API Services Dashboard. And then you can search. So you can search for Places. You'll see Places API and come up here. Click on that. And there would be a button here to enable if it wasn't already enabled, but you'll see I already have it enabled. So I go back. So now that I found the API, I've enabled it. Go to Credentials, and you'll see I already have an API key created. I can create another one by coming up here and saying Create Credentials, API key, and boom, there's another API key. And what you want to do is click on here to copy, and then you put it in your code. So I'm just going to delete this one. And this is the one I'm using. You'll see it in the code. And again, like I said, I'm going to delete this after today. So that's it as far as enabling the API and creating the API key.
The Google Places API is a URL-based API with a query string. It's divided into 2 parts. There's a base URL that varies slightly depending on which API you're going to use, and a query string where we tell the service what we want returned. The query string is built dynamically through our code and will include the API key at the very end. So the API key is what we generated earlier from the website, And that's basically our authorization, as if we were doing OAuth, but we've already done it one time. We've generated the API key on the site once, and then we reuse it for every request. First one we'll cover is the place search. This is a documentation link, and it's divided into, there's 3 different types of place searches. So there's the find place, nearby search, and a text search. Next one is place details. And there's the link for the documentation. And the final one is place photos. And here's a link for that documentation. Okay, the place search. Here's from the documentation, and you'll see right here is the actual request that gets sent. And the good thing about these URL requests with the query string is use debugger and you trap the URL that's generated. You can actually plug it into a browser and see what's returned. That's a lot of times helpful when you're trying to debug it. So you see in this case, the base URL is the https maps.googlemaps.api.com/maps API. And then place, and then part of the query string starts with the find place from text. And then for output, you have a choice of JSON or XML. I've used JSON for this example. I really like the JSONParser and the JSON tools that they have in the newer versions of PowerBuilder, starting with 2017. And then you include what fields you want returned from the service, and then you have your input parameters, so whatever you want to search on. Next is the place details, and you'll see at the bottom there the required parameter for that one is place ID. That's all you need to get place details, and you'll get the place ID from the original request to find place. So you'll see here the base URL is very similar, maps.googlemaps.api.com/maps API place, except this one is details, and then you'll have the rest of your query string. And our final one is place photos, and the required parameter for that is photo reference. And again, that's a field that you request in either the find place or the place details, and we'll show that in the code. But again, here's the base URL for the request. All right, so we have optional parameters. So like I was saying, what you want to do is include the fields parameter, because that will determine what gets returned to you. And especially if you're using a data window to display the results, you want to know exactly what fields are coming back. So you can control it with this fields parameter. Some of the values you can use for it are formatted address, and then some of the basic down here. I use things like name, place ID, URL, and there's quite a bit more. You can go through the documentation, but we'll go through that in the code when we do the demo. Now it's time for the fun part, the demo. So you'll see here in the target we have 3 windows. There's a place search window, place details window, and then a browser that we're going to display the photos in. I borrowed a PFC string service to help do some parsing. And here's my service object, the end Google Places. I have some data windows, and then I have just a regular application object that calls the window. So the first window is a place search window. The place search itself has 2 different types of searches. You can search by name, or like any kind of string name based. You can do, like Chili's in Wallingford, which is my town, or anything similar to that as a name search. And then here's the results will display down here. I've chose to return only name and place ID for the place search. And then I've got this set up where you double click on the row that you want to view, and you'll get the details. So we'll go to the details window. And here you'll see it will display the name, phone number, the rating, and a website. To the right here are the hours for the business. And then down here is a photo reference data window where we'll have rows with the different photos that are available for that particular business. And then again, I've got it so if you double click on the photo reference, it'll pull up the photo of the business or whatever. Some of them have multiple photos, and you can click on it, double click on either one of them. All right, so let's run it. Okay, so for phone number, I have one saved here for, I think it's Dunkin' Donuts. You have to put it in the format, the international format with the plus sign. So I'll paste that in here. Run it, and yes, it's Dunkin' Donuts. Here's the place ID for it. So if I double click on that, we're going to use the place ID and get the place details. So there we go. It's Dunkin'. Here's the phone number. They have a 4.2 rating. Here is their website. And if we want to, we can even select that, copy it, put it in a browser. And it should bring us to the Dunkin' Donuts website. And there it is. Okay, and then you see the hours over here. And over here we have the photo references, a few of them. So if we double click on those, we'll run the photo API, and we'll pull up a picture. And there's your Dunkin' Donuts. And they have a bunch of different pictures, so if we can select different ones. It's a different view of it. I think they have some specific foods. Let's see. Yep. Tasty sandwich. Making me hungry. So that's that. We can also search by name. We can do Dunkin' again. Details. Same thing. We can do something like Chili's. See the name Chili's Grill and Bar. Double click. Here's our Chili's information, hours, and pictures. Like I said, we can do something like Burger King in Wallingford. And there we go. That's a Wallingford phone number. The rating is only 3.8. There's their URL, hours, and again we have photo references that'll pull up pictures. So if we look at some of the code, try to keep it simple. There's our place search. The run button just resets the data window and triggers a window function. Go back here. Look at the window function. And this will be in the code review, but we build a query a little bit different based on if the phone number button is checked or if the name is checked. And here we just we create the non-visual if it's not already created. And we call the OF find places on that. And then we've got a parse routine in there. It's JSON is returned from the function. We parse the JSON out into the string that we need. It's actually a JSON string that we'll return. And actually this is passed by reference. LSJSON is passed by reference here. And we get it back, and then we use it in the GW1 import JSON. And that's how we get that. So another thing I wanted to show is, like I mentioned before, you can trap the URL, and that gets sent to the service, and then you can just pull that up in a browser to help you debug. So let's do that. This time we'll do 99. There should be a 99 house in my town, or 99 restaurant, whatever it's called. All right, so here we're about to call the service. We're inside the NVO, and we've already put together the query string here, and we have the full URL here. So if I come down here and find the full URL, it is ls full URL. Here it is. If I copy that and again plug it into a browser, we call a service, and here's what gets returned. So it's a candidates object that contains the two fields I requested, name and place ID. And then we parse that. You pull out the candidates object, and then we have the array, which in this case only has one item in it. And then we do an import JSON right into the data window. So that's pretty simple. Let's go back and go into the detail. Oh, we're still in debugger. Let's let this run through. There we go. And we'll double click, and I've got another stop in there. So this time we're trapping the full URL for the get detail. And again, this time we have more fields that we're looking at. You'll see I have AS fields equals name. Oh, let's pull it up here, it's easier. There it is. Copy that. Put it into TextPad. Notepad++, I guess it is. So you see the fields I have are name, type. They're separated by %2C, rating, opening hours, website, formatted phone number, and photo. And we'll see the full URL here. We'll copy that, and we'll paste that in the browser. And there we go. So this time the object is called result, and then here's the objects. Here's the fields I requested: phone number, name, opening hours, weekday text, and actually that's part of opening hours, and photos. And then in this case there's multiple elements in the array. But anyway, like I said, that's the best way if you need to debug your code. If you're getting errors or things like that, you can see exactly what your full URL is here, and you plug it into the browser and you see what you get. A little bit easier than stepping all the way through and getting all the values in debugger. And then you can save this and figure out how you want to parse it, because it's not always easy to parse a JSON if it doesn't go directly into a data window. And anytime you have any of these arrays, so this period's here, see it's got the opening bracket, so that's going to be an array. So anytime, if you have just simple objects or strings or whatever numbers, you can do an import JSON on that when it's returned as JSON, but you can't do that anytime there's an array inside the JSON. So now we'll just finish through the debugger. Oops. And there's our details window. All right, that's it for the demo.
On to the code review. Okay, once again, you'll see all the objects in this application on the left here. One thing I forgot to mention about the PFC and CST string is, again, I pulled it out of the PFC library to be standalone, but I had to make some modifications to it. As anyone who's worked with the PFC knows, everything is pretty tightly coupled inside the PFC, so pulling objects out to be standalone isn't very easy. This object isn't bad at all, just had to modify the inheritance and a couple other things. But I will be posting this code on Code Exchange, so if you have an application that you need to do some string manipulation, that's a very good service to use. I highly recommend it. So you feel free to take it from my Pivot on Code Exchange. Okay, the click event of the window, the button is very simple. It just resets the display data window and calls the WF find place on the window. Here's the code for the find place. We have our variables, pretty simple, a bunch of strings, and then a string array for the photos at the end here. So I do a constant string for the fields, and the two that I want returned from the service are name and place, and you'll notice separated by the %2c. That's what Google uses to parse the fields. So then we just check which checkbox or radio button is checked, and if it's the phone number one, we say the type is going to be a phone number search, and otherwise we use this text query. Then if our instance variable or service isn't created, we create it, and then we call the OF find place function on that. We use just a string for find place from text, and then our variables that we've set up. Then once we get a return, if we have a good return from our non-visual service object, then we just do an import JSON into the data window. All right, here's the function that gets called in the service. So we use the HTTPClient object, a bunch of string variables. So then we check if it's a phone number search, we have to append %2b to the front. That's just how Google likes it. And once again, like I mentioned, the phone number has to be in the +1 format, international. So then in all of my functions, I do try catches, all my non-visual functions. So first we build a query string, and we say fields equals, and then what we passed for fields, which you saw before was name and place ID. And then our input type, search, and at the very end we have our key, which is just an instance variable on the non-visual. I set that up as a constant as well, so it doesn't change. So again, if you go and create a new key, all you have to do is replace it in one place, an instance variable on this non-visual, and you're all set. Then we build the full URL and I'll show I use URL as a constant again in the instance variables of this non-visual. And again, it's just the base URL, and then we add to it search type, and format is another constant, and that's JSON, and then we add the query string. And we create our HTTP client object, and we send the request. The type is GET, and then we send the full URL. And again, this is where you want to trap, and how I showed in the debugger, where you trap and get the full URL if you want to put it in the browser and see what's returned. And then we just do some checking if it's a good return. And the response code from the service is 200. Then we'll get the response body into this ASJSON variable, which we've passed by reference. And then we'll parse it. So there's a parse routine in this service. It's called OF_parse find place. And we pass the JSON again by reference. And that's the end of this function. We just return what's returned from the parse. And then we have a catch. Finally, I haven't done anything with this particular catch. Typically, you do you put the error into the ASJSON and return -1 there. I'll probably add that after the video. Since we're passing the ASJSON by reference, that'll return our error code that we've caught. And then finally, we want to delete or destroy the HTTP client object, and there's a code for that. And we'll show the parse of the find place, and so we're declaring a JSON parser and some other variables. If there's anything wrong with the JSON, if it's null or if it's empty string, then we'll just return a 0. And then we create the JSON parser. We load our JSON string. We start by getting the root item, and the top level top level object is called candidates. So in this case, we do a get item array JSON string. We pass the root that we just got and a string for candidates. And then we return the length of the JSON that's been manipulated. And we have a catch, and here's where I'm going to copy this and put it in the other function. So ASJSON equals the runtime error object dot get message, and then we'll return -1. And then finally, we're going to destroy the parser, and that's it. So back in the window, we will just check that the return is greater than 0, and then we'll do an import JSON into the data window as we showed in the window. So that if we go back here, the get item array JSON string at the bottom here, because I've requested simple fields, the name and place ID, there's no arrays in the JSON, so you can do this and just return the JSON and import that directly into the window, into the data window. All right, on to the place details. So as you saw in the demo, when you double click on the data window, it opens the details. So this is fairly simple. What we're going to do is take the place ID from the data window and open the details window, passing that place ID as a parameter. Here's the place details window, and it's very simple. In the open event, we just take the string parm that we passed in, and we set up an instance variable isPlaceID. We set that and then call the window function wf_getDetails. Here's wf_getDetails. Got our variables. We use the JSON parser. Here's where I use the PFC and CST string. And that's an auto instantiate, so you don't have to create it. We tell what fields we want. In this case, we're going to do some more fields for the detail. We want name, type, rating, opening hours, website, formatted phone number, and photo. And the photo is going to be an array. So we can't just return simple JSON and put it in the data window. We're going to have to parse these individually. So then we create the service again, and we call OF place details. We'll pass the place ID, our fields, and the JSON string that we want returned, and the photo array that we have up here. Continue this. So if we get a good return code, we're going to insert a row in the data window. We're going to create the parser, load our JSON string, and we want to make sure that there was no error. So if the JSON string loaded fine, then we go on, get the root, and we parse out the phone number. We put it into the data window. We parse out the name, put that in the data window, rating, website, and then we get the hours. That's going to be an array. So first we get the object, and then if the handle is good, this get item object returns a handle. So this child handle is greater than 0. Then we're going to get item array JSON string, and the field we're looking for is weekday text. And again, this is going to return JSON, but it's going to be in brackets, so we have to remove the brackets. So let's redo that. We create an array out of it to make it easy to put into the data windows, where I use the PFC and CST string, and we'd use the OF parse to array function, where we pass a string and we get back an array. This ls hours, oops, sorry about that. The ls hours is an array, and then we put the array right into the data window using object dot notation. So we do dw2.object.column name .primary equals the array, and that will load it into the data window. And we populate the photos after that. So and we'll show how we get the photo array in the next in the parser for that. But if the upper boundary of the array is greater than 0, then we'll do the same thing with the photo references, and we'll do dw3 object photo reference primary equals the array, and that's it for this function. We have our cleanup. In this case, we're in the window, so I just did a message box. Again, as I mentioned before in my other session, non-visual objects, best practices, you don't want to do a message box inside a non-visual. Inside a window, you're fine, as long as that window isn't used in a batch application. Then we have our final, and we just clean up, destroy the parser, and that's it. So now we're inside the service and Google Places, OF place details. So I actually created 2 functions, one to get the details without the photo references, and then this one is including the photo references. So we have some string variables, our HTTP client object. Again, in all my non-visual object functions, I'm going to do a try catch. First, we build our query string with the fields that we passed, and we also passed place ID, and then our key, again, which we generated from the Google site, and we have saved as a instance variable. Then we build the full URL, which includes the query string. So we have our base URL, and then this is details, and our format, again, is an instance variable on this object, and we have it set to JSON, and then our query string. So we create our HTTP client object, and then we send a request. Once again, it's a GET, and we send the full URL. And this is where I showed where you can trap it in the debugger, get the full URL, and put it in a browser, and then you'll see exactly the JSON that's returned. Or you can actually just keep going through debugger and check the JSON that's returned here in the get response body. So if we had a good return code from that function, and the status code is 200. Then we'll go pull out the JSON, and then we do two different parses here because this is a complex JSON object. The photos are in an array, so we have to pull that out separately. So first we do this OF parse photo 3, photo ref 3. I did a few different versions of this parse routine. So this is the photo 3, or reference 3 is the last one. There's another one that I used for the object is slightly different if you do it from the find instead of the details. So it has to be parsed differently. But we passed, in this case, we passed the JSON. I did it again. We passed the JSON by value because we don't want it manipulated. And we're going to use it in the next function, so we don't want to manipulate it at all. And then we pass AS photo, which is an array, and we pass that by reference. That's going to get populated from this function. And then lastly, we parse the details out. We had to do this second because we're going to actually parse that. We pass the AS JSON by reference here, and we're going to manipulate the JSON and use what's returned from that for the details. So we can't do that first because then what we pass into to get the photos doesn't contain the photos anymore. So we have to do that first. And then we do our usual cleanup. If there's a runtime error, we catch it and put it in the JSON and return -1. And then in the finally, we always clean up whatever we create. All right, so here's the photo parsing. This is OF parse photo ref 3. We have our JSON parser, JSON item type. It's a little bit different. We're using this one, and Boolean for if it contains key, which we'll check later in the code. First, we check if the JSON is good. If it's null or empty string, we return 0, saying we didn't do anything. So then we create the JSON parser, load the string, get the root item, and then we get the highest level object, which is called the result, using the get item object JSON string. Then we take that string and load it into the parser again. And we get the root item from that. And then we'll get the array. This is actually the handle to the photo array. So then we set up a couple of variables, loop and photo item. So this is where I would love to have Apion do an enhancement to the parser object to allow you to get the size of the array object. So you can get the handle to it and you can do some things with it, but you don't know the size of the array. So hopefully they will add in some type of size function to get the size of the array. So because of that, I've had to do a do while loop. And so I say while the photo item is not -1, I increment the loop, and then we start our get child item. So this will loop through the array and pull out each individual child item. And then once we have that item, again, I check if the item is greater than 0. Then I do a get item string from that, and the object we're looking for is photo reference. So then it'll pull it out and it'll put it into this AS photo array, and then it'll keep looping until it hits when it's not when this photo item turns into -1 is when it can't find it, and so it'll end the loop, and then we will return the upper bound of the array. And again, we pass that array by reference, so that array will be returned as well. And as with all the functions, we have our catch and our finally, and that's it for the photo parser. Last but not least is place photos, and we'll kick that off from the place details screen. And on that screen, we have a data window that has our photo reference rows, and that's DW3. So we have double-clicked code here, and so we're going to declare a local variable for our W browser, And then to save us some headaches and possible errors down the road, we're going to say if the row argument for the double-clicked event is not greater than 0, then just return and wait till they click a valid row. And then we're going to get the actual key value from the photo reference column. Once we have that, we create our non-visual service object, again if it's not already created. And then we call the function ofGetPhotoURL on that object. And we pass in the key, and it's going to build the URL for us, which we're going to pass to the window. All right, here's the function for the ofGetPhotoURL. And some string variables. And as usual, we're going to build our query string. This max width is a requirement when you're calling the photo function. And then we say the photo reference equals the string that we passed, and then our famous key that we generated on the Google site. And here we build the full URL, once again with our base URL, and then we're adding photo, and then the query string. And that's what we return. And the browser window is very simple. It's just a blank window with a browser control on it. And first thing we're going to do is on the open, we're going to catch the string parm, put that in a string variable, and then we're going to navigate to that URL. And that's it. While we're waiting for questions, here's some links. First, we have our community, API community, where there's discussions. You can get some technical advice, articles, videos, etc. We have the Facebook link, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube. Time for question answers.